It's been a challenging spring so far here in the UK. Low light levels and lots of rain. But the garden and the allotment seems to be doing okay. So even though June is the first month of summer here, I wonder what the rest of summer is going to bring us. Whatever the summer does bring, I'm going to give you a few tips on how to navigate it. The one thing that I think is really important to get on top of is weeding. A lot of weeds kind of blow in and settle themselves, I find, especially on paths. I just go along and kind of pinch them out, or I get a little trowel underneath them like this and take them out. Every time I'm working on a bed, I'm also working on the path next to me, so it just doesn't get too big a problem. One of June's great harvests is garlic. So, when do you harvest it? Well, unfortunately this year I've had a lot of rust on my garlic. If you have still got green leaves on your garlic, then leave them in for just that little bit longer. And I can see where I cut back the rust off my garlic. The new leaves here have still got a little bit of green, so I am going to leave these in. The ideal time to harvest garlic, if you sowed it in October last year, is the solstice. So that is when I will harvest mine. I'm hoping there is some garlic, however, and I'm just going to pull this one out here, that is not looking so good. The cloves are formed, which is good, but the bulbs are very small. And if I start peeling these leaves back from this garlic, you'll see that the cloves are forming here. The only problem is, because it did get rust, I have got small bulbs, so I'm not too worried about that. There you go. The other thing you need to watch out for is allium leaf miner, and I have found that a few of my garlic bulbs have had allium leaf miner. This here is soft garlic. You can see that it bends really nicely. Hard garlic stays in the ground a lot longer, so I would definitely be leaving that. But the ones that are really affected with rust, I'm going to take out now. Courgettes. I like picking them when they're really small, especially this variety. So this variety is called Zephyr. So when is a courgette ready? Usually when you see the flower and the flower is actually still open, that means that the courgette, or zucchini if you want to call it that, is still in optimum growing condition. So I kind of wait until the flowers actually are finished, and I don't wait too long after that, because then the bottoms of them start to get a little bit dry. But if your courgettes or zucchinis aren't as far ahead as these ones are, don't worry, because I planted these very early. This was in the greenhouse. I've just taken it out to just give a little bit of room to show you what I'm doing. And hopefully with some warm weather, your courgettes or zucchinis will grow very fast. Peas are a classic June harvest, and you've got a really good month or so, even into July, of picking peas, depending on what type of pea they are, if they're going to be a podding pea, or in this case these are sugar snap peas, and that's because you eat the whole of the pod and they make a snap sound when you break them. So I did my podding peas in the greenhouse. I overwintered them in pots and they're finished. We're not big podding peas eaters. Gosh, that's quite a mouthful to say. But I have got sugar snap peas in the garden, and I've also got behind me, I've got my Mangetout or my snow peas in the garden as well. And they are doing really well, and they have really enjoyed the rain this year. I've also got another succession of Mangetout or sugar or snow peas inside that I'm going to be putting out just for a really late harvest. And being a legume, they also have nitrogen nodules on their roots. So when these are finished, I just cut them off at soil level, even though the plant by that stage will have actually used a lot of the nitrogen, but it's actually worth it just keeping it in the ground. I do that with most plants actually. I cut them off at soil level and then I let the roots decompose in the ground, and then that's it. I won't have to actually put any more compost down in these beds because I did that before the peas went in, and I can then succession sow with my next lot of plants. I'm actually quite amazed that I've got any carrots in this bed, to tell you the truth, with all the problems with slugs and snails this year. And as you can see down that end, I haven't thinned yet. That is also, I've got a bit of surface annual weed coming up in there, and it's pretty easy to pull out. But I do have carrots coming up. I sowed these back in May, the 21st of May this year. And you can see they're quite patchy because there was a slug and snail, one or two or maybe 200 in this bed, and they did have a little bit of a field day. So I will re-sow in between. These are my winter carrots, so these are going to stay in the ground for a while. I have two types. I have Eskimo, which is an F1, and I also have Touchon as well. So if you want to thin and you like thinning carrots, which I will do, you can use the tops as well. They make a really nice pesto actually, so don't waste any of the carrot. I'm going to wait for these just to get a little bit bigger, and then I will actually thin out the carrots a little bit more. But until now, I'm just going to take out this annual weed here. I also have spring onions or salad onions in the middle of these rows because I wanted to make the most of these beds. So the spring onions will probably come out before the carrots, so it's quite a good idea to put onions in. It's also, they say it's a little bit of a deterrent for carrot fly, but I have got mesh ready. So this bed gets covered with mesh for carrot fly, and then hopefully I should have gotten rid of most of them. As well as general weeding, you might want to look at your edges, because if they're looking a little bit shabby, this is a perfect place for slugs and snails to hide under. I'm not particularly fussy about how things look, but I don't want to give those little slimy critters any place to hide. So I get my edging tool and I just go along and edge this. You can do it with a knife, you can do it with scissors, you can do it with anything. They are not going to go near my potatoes. If you look on seed packets, there are quite a lot of seeds that you can grow in June, but there are some that I particularly recommend for June, and they will be absolutely fantastic later on in the year. They are beetroot. So this beetroot will be for your main crop beetroot, and you can store it over winter. The other thing that's really good to sow in June as well is Swiss chard or silver beet. You can grow carrots outside in raised beds, in the ground if you've got good soil, or in troughs and pots. And the other thing is purple sprouting broccoli. They usually say that on the solstice it's really good to do purple sprouting broccoli, and then you will have it later on, winter and spring, during the hungry gap. So while I'm at it, let's talk about what I wouldn't sow in June. The first thing I wouldn't sow in June is any kind of Asian green. So things like tatsoi, pak choi, komatsuma, mitsuna obviously. Include into there radish, spinach as well. And the other thing that I don't sow in June is rocket. Rocket suffers a lot from flea beetle here in Lincolnshire especially. I don't know whether it does with you, but it does with me, and it has a tendency to bolt as well. One thing I would also hold off sowing until the end of July is fennel, Florence fennel, because again, that will probably bolt as well. If you've got undercover space in the summer, then yay, you're very, very lucky, because chilies love to be undercover. Sweet peppers, they're a little bit more tolerant of being outside. So I actually grow quite a few of my sweet peppers in my raised beds. I do have a polythene cover to put over them if the temperatures do drop. The other thing that does really well undercover in the UK, and I am zone 8B, are cucumbers. They like to be undercover, and also melons. Tomatoes don't really care that much. They can be outside. They're very, very tough. They do well outside. The only thing that you have to watch is blight. Potatoes are doing really well now. There's a lot of lovely green foliage and everything is looking really great. The tubers are starting to swell underground, which is fantastic. And I was just doing a little bit of hoeing here, so I just thought that I would show you what you do if you do no-dig potatoes. So because no-dig, you have got firmer subsoil, the potatoes have a tendency to push upwards, and sometimes you can see them just popping out of the ground a little bit. So there's two things that I do. The first thing is that when I do my hoeing, I then actually push the soil up against the homes. So that's one way of doing it. And the other way is that if you've got some compost, just dump the compost like round the actual homes, or if you can in the center as well, without breaking them, of course. And that's the other way that you can kind of make sure that you're always covering the potatoes, because you don't want potatoes to come up to the surface, because as soon as they hit sunlight, they're going to go green, and that definitely is a no-no. I did try one year doing grass clippings, but I did find that it was a little bit of a luxury hotel for slugs and snails, so I don't do that anymore. Covers for the summer, especially things like mesh, veggie mesh, or any kind of mesh, is definitely worthwhile investing in my opinion. Here I've got a bed of brassicas, and behind me I've got a bed of alliums. So they protect the brassicas against flea beetle, against caterpillars, and the alliums they protect against allium leaf miner. And I wouldn't be without them. Look at my brassicas, how wonderful they are. Broad beans are one of the many harvests that you have in June, and I would say in about 10 days' time these are all going to be finished. So what I do is I actually cut them off at ground level or soil level, and I leave the roots in the ground, or I might just twist them out and leave whatever's in the ground to decay. And then it's always a good idea to have your next crop to go in. So I just dib a bit of a hole because I'm a no digger, and I put my next crop in. And in this bed, it's going to be kaleets for the winter. June is a really good time to take cuttings of woody herbs. So things like rosemary, thyme, sage as well. And you can take cuttings in a myriad of ways, but I'm a little bit of a lazy cutting person. I don't really take a great deal of cuttings, but when I do, what I do is I look for a nice stem here from the actual plant. So this here is variegated lemon thyme, and I just make sure that the woody stem has got not many leaves on it, like so, and I just stick it in a glass of water, or in this case in a jar of water, and let them do their thing and just root. You can also do it with rosemary as well. If you're going to take a cutting from rosemary, take the leaves off the bottom of the rosemary, and again, like I said, I just stick it in a bit of water. And okay, I may not get every single cutting root, but it doesn't matter. Even if I get 10%, I'm happy that I got 10%. You can do mint as well, but mint I have a tendency to do from the roots because it's much easier, but you can do it with mint. I'm going to continue to take a few more cuttings of this thyme here. Yeah, so you can make a lot more herbs just by sticking it in some water. June is a really good time to prune your stone fruit trees. Anything like plums, green gages, apricots, peaches, nectarines, cherries as well. If you do it in the winter, if you prune them in the winter, then you do have an issue perhaps with silverleaf infection. But if you do it at this time of year, then the sap is flowing really, really well and it heals any kind of cuts that you've got. So I usually kind of tip prune my trees. If I see long shoots like this, I will go in and I will tip prune the tree. This is a young green gage. I've only had this really for 12 months or so. So there's no fruit on this one this year. So it's a perfect time to go in and prune. The other thing is, if you find that there's not enough ventilation going through the center, you can prune that out as well. I have a nectarine here and I left it in the greenhouse over the winter, but there's a lot of dead wood on it. So I cut that out as well.